Good afternoon, everyone. Hurricane Dorian continues on a path toward North Carolina, and the threat of significant storm damage to our state is very real. This storm is strong and it's relentless. We must be ready. Today, I issued a mandatory evacuation order for our state's barrier islands. Some counties have already ordered evacuations, and I urge residents to take these orders and this storm seriously. It takes time to evacuate the barrier islands, so now is the time to act. Start moving well before the storm in order to get to safety. Do not try to ride it out. You're putting your life at risk, and you're also putting at risk the lives of first responders who may have to rescue you. This morning, I visited with emergency responders in Wilmington, where they are preparing for the storm and are fully operational at the New Hanover County Emergency Operations Center. I'm proud of them. And we have so many dedicated public servants working around the clock to make sure our communities are ready. And that is happening all across our state today, including right here at the state EOC. You can help make their jobs easier by following evacuation orders and getting out of harm's way. As more local governments order evacuations, shelters are opening to give evacuees a safe place to go. We're opening large shelters for evacuees across the state, including one in Durham, beginning at 6 p.m. tonight. A shelter for people with specialized medical needs will open in Clayton tomorrow. I've requested a federal disaster declaration for North Carolina ahead of the storm. We are waiting for it to be granted, but when it is, that will make federal response and recovery aid available to our state. I've also activated more than 300 North Carolina National Guard soldiers to help with storm response. Water rescue teams are also deploying today to staging areas closer to our coast. The North Carolina Highway Patrol and the Department of Transportation are working to help keep roads open for people who are evacuating. There is still time for you to get prepared, but do not wait. You should have a well-stocked emergency kit with food and water to support your family and pets for several days. Even if you aren't in an evacuation area right now, have an evacuation plan. Make arrangements to stay with family or friends in a safe place, and if you can't do that, make sure you know where public shelters are. Make sure you also have a way to stay informed and receive severe weather alerts as well as information from local officials. And you can always visit readync.org for helpful checklists to help you get all of these things done. I have with me today Emergency Management Director Mike Sprayberry, Secretary Eric Hooks of the North Carolina Department of Transportation, Katie Webster, our meteorologist, General Todd Hunt from the North Carolina National Guard, Colonel Glenn McNeil, the commander of the North Carolina Highway Patrol, Libby Turner, who is our FEMA representative, and also Lee Williamson, who is our sign language interpreter today. And I'm going to have Mike Sprayberry, our Emergency Management Director, and Secretary Jim Trogdon from the Department of Transportation to brief us in both of these areas, and then we will take questions. Mike?
Thank you, Governor. Good afternoon. The State Emergency Operations Center remains activated at Level 1, which means we have our entire state emergency response team here with us. That includes all the state agencies, federal partners, volunteer agencies, as well as our private sector partners. We're still tracking Hurricane Dorian very closely with our county partners and remain in close contact with the National Hurricane Center. And we know that rain, storm surge, and winds will all be a significant threat for this event, particularly east of I-95, with the greatest hazards being along our coastline. The greatest impacts will be felt Thursday and Friday, but we can feel the impacts as early as tomorrow. We urge everybody to complete your storm preparations by tomorrow. The State Emergency Response Team has been filling resource requests for our county partners to include food, water, shower trailers, swiftwater rescue teams, and National Guard high water vehicle teams. We'll have all assets staged and in place prior to the onset of tropical storm force winds. Our utility partners are positioned for power restoration operations as soon as Dorian passes. Our FEMA partners are also well integrated here with us at the State Emergency Operations Center, and they've established an incident support base at Fort Bragg to provide commodities to us as needed. We continue to work with our sheltering operation for both medical support and general population, and we'll be able to shelter pets as necessary. We continue to hold conference calls with our county partners every day. They're meeting with their control groups to make final decisions on evacuations and their sheltering operations. I want to remind everybody that after the storm and when the storm winds arrive, there's going to be debris that's going to be accumulating. Local governments will begin curbside storm debris pickup as soon as it's safe to do so. After the storm, look on your county or city website or social media channels for debris pickup information and follow that guidance. It's important to separate the debris into individual piles. For example, place construction and building debris in one pile and any trees or branches in another. So in closing, let me thank our media partners for providing important information to the residents and visitors of North Carolina, and to remind everyone to follow the instructions of their local officials. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
I'll now recognize Secretary Jim Trogdon of the North Carolina Department of Transportation. Jim?
Thank you, Governor. NCDOT continues to prepare our employees' equipment and continue to assess our inventories. We have 1,000 chainsaws ready to go, 1,700 pieces of equipment, over 3,000 barricades, 1,600 road closed signs, and 2,700 high water signs available to use where needed. Our evacuation routes have been operating today at or better than the posted speed limits, and we believe we'll continue to be able to support the evacuation needs moving forward. As of this morning, our ferry division was supporting evacuation of Ocracoke of visitors, and tomorrow we'll shift over to residents. As of 3 o'clock today, we moved over 900 personnel and 496 vehicles off of Ocracoke Island, and we know those numbers will continue to grow. All ferries are running today on regular schedules. Ferry runs from Ocracoke to Cedar Island, Hatteras, and Swan Quarter will end early Wednesday afternoon based on forecasted conditions. The ports of Wilmington and Moorhead operated today as normal and will continue to operate supporting commercial traffic until noon on Wednesday and will fully close at 1 p.m. on Wednesday. Our aviation division prepared crews to deploy drones in support of damage assessments as needed across our state after Hurricane Dorian passes. Some of our DMV offices in coastal areas will be closed Wednesday. Those locations will be posted on the DMV website. Our DMV license and theft will be supporting law enforcement in and around all of the affected areas of the storm. The Piedmont and Carolinian trains are operating on normal schedules today between Raleigh and Charlotte. The auto train southbound Palmetto, the Silver Meteor, and the Silver Star are not operating today through North Carolina. So if you have any questions on train operations, please go to the Amtrak website. Please stay aware of all public advisories on Hurricane Dorian. They can change rapidly, and please go to drivenc.gov before you travel. Thank you.
We'll now entertain questions for me or anyone on the podium. Sir. How about grab the mic there, Gary?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Gary Robertson, Associated Press. This is probably for Mike. Do you have any estimate of how many people are actually being ordered off the barrier islands? I mean, is there a number? And could you, again, describe what mandatory evacuations mean?
So, I mean, I can't You know, I can go look at a census tract and give you an idea based on looking at each barrier island, but it's all the way from the South Carolina border all the way up to Currituck. We're looking at having all those barrier islands evacuated. I can't give you a number, but what that means is the governor, as well as most of the jurisdictions there, they're given an order for folks to move off those islands beginning tomorrow. And so I think that's for safety's sake, and they need to heed what the local officials are telling them, and they need to heed what the executive order says by the governor, because we can see by the forecast track of the storm, there's going to be hurricane force winds that are going to be blowing over the barrier islands. It's not a good idea to remain in place. Thank you.
I know, Gary, in Hurricane Florence, we had hundreds of thousands of people who were evacuating back to the west, and we may see mandatory evacuations of entire counties, not just barrier islands. Generally, we've left that as a local decision, but last time with Hurricane Florence, I issued an order evacuating some of the barrier islands because they just didn't do it, and I think that that's probably a good practice, particularly when you've got a hurricane of this strength bearing down on us. Can you get her a mic?
Thanks. Can you tell us where the Durham and Clayton shelters are, and then also what you were talking about last year? Are there lessons learned from last year that have kind of changed the way you all are preparing this year?
First, the Durham shelter is located at Northgate Mall at the old Sears building. And I think that we have the potential of another shelter there if necessary at an old Macy's building. Where's the Clayton one?
I don't know the exact address.
We'll get that for you, but if there's a specialized medical center that's opening in Clayton, we try to, a lot of people in these storms, when they're evacuated, they have everyday needs with their physical condition, whether it's dialysis or whether it's chemotherapy or anything that they're supposed to be having. And so we wanted to make sure we had a place where those people could come who are getting that kind of treatment. I think one thing we did learn from Florence is, particularly when you had such mass evacuations from the coast, that we did need large mega shelters in the middle of the state, because most of the local shelters were overflowing. There just wasn't enough room for them. For example, in New Hanover today, they said they had 2 local shelters that were open, but they were interested in what we were doing because they knew they may need to send some people that way. And we'll see the severity of the storm, and we'll see how many people we're talking about, but I think we have a much better idea about establishing these mega shelters. We've even talked to the Friday Center again. There's potential that we could do that like we did last time. So I think we have a lot of willing partners out there, people who are willing to help us and are ready to shelter people if necessary.
Oh, Governor, over here.
Oh, great, sure.
That's okay. So some of our crews are down at the coast, and they'd spoken with the mayor of Wrightsville Beach, and the mayor is telling us that he was not consulted about apparently a mandatory evacuation order that's going into effect at 8 a.m., and he said that they're having to ramp up, getting residents and notifying residents out there. I don't know if you could speak to that at all.
We talked to local officials in New Hanover County this morning, and in fact, we were going to do it earlier than 8 a.m. tomorrow morning because I was concerned about the amount of time that it takes to evacuate these barrier islands. But we agreed upon an 8 a.m. mandatory evacuation in the morning. Some barrier islands are evacuating a little earlier than that. Mike, if you have anything specific that you'd want to add to that. But I don't know if anyone has spoken directly to the mayor of Wrightsville Beach, but we operate in communicating directly with county officials, and that they were consulted this morning. The New Hanover County officials were consulted this morning. Yes.
This may be, sorry, Laura Leslie, WRAL. This may be a question for Secretary Trogdon. So, like last month, I guess it was, we heard about some cash crunch issues at the DOT. And at the time, we talked to the chief operating officer who said that another big storm would seriously strap the budget. So we're wondering, is the budget crunch at DOT going to affect the response? And, you know, are you able to sort of emerge? Is there a way to suspend the requirements for the cash on hand for an emergency situation, or how does that work?
We will find a way to make sure that emergency operations are covered. The way it works is that the state has to advance money, and eventually the feds reimburse in their percentage, mostly 75%. But I'll let Secretary Trogdon address that if he would.
Yeah, so great question, Lauren. Thank you. First is this has got to be our number one priority. I think the safety of our citizens, the supporting our economy, so response and recovery is going to be our number one priority no matter what, so it will not affect how we respond. And the governor was exactly correct. What we'll do is once we see the magnitude of the damage, we'll come up with estimates. We've already been working with our federal partners on faster reimbursement and got some things that are moving very well from the Federal Highway and USDOT. We're working lots of strategies internally, both for disaster response and then our normal TIP delivery, operations and maintenance side. So this is the number one priority. We'll deal with what Dorian brings us, and we'll develop the strategy to make sure it does not impact the economy of North Carolina.
Other questions? Yes.
Up for the secretary, if those specifics, can you give those again about the different equipment you're preparing? You kind of ran through that a little quickly. You said 1,000 chains. Can you run through that one more time?
Yeah, we have 1,000 chainsaws, 1,700 pieces of equipment, 3,100 barricades, 1,600 roads closed signs, and 2,700 high water signs. And all of those are critical when it comes to responding to hurricanes.
Governor, admittedly, this is not a hurricane question. I'm just seeing a tweet, and I wanted to get a reaction from you on this. This is a partisan gerrymandering ruling came down today. This is the 3-judge panel. It was a favorable ruling for the plaintiffs, if I have this right. I'm doing it in live time. Obviously, it's going to kick up to the state Supreme Court, but the ruling is that current state House and state Senate plans have been struck down and will be required to be redrawn immediately. Yeah. Obviously, that has to go through one more.
We can talk about this later. I think I'd rather stick to hurricane-related questions at this point. But thank you for asking. But we'll talk to you about that later. Yes.
One more question about today's evacuation order. So, kind of following up on what Josh was asking. We heard that all these folks are supposed to be leaving at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Are there shelters available and open for those people to go to at this point, or are we going to see a lag time? And I'm also wondering about, are we seeing folks coming from the south like we did in Florence, which sort of complicated matters as people from the south Florida and Georgia were looking for places to get away from the storm as well? Right.
And so a lot of shelters are being opened county to county. And so that means that it's sort of like a mutual aid and how they work with each other. So we are helping them work through that. So that's kind of the first line of shelters that we have in our counties. And then we're also opening, as the governor mentioned, one up in Durham, and we can have the contingency opening another one just about the same size, and then a third one all in the same general area of the triangle here. We can go further west if we have to. We would like not to, but and as far as folks coming up from the south, the traffic flow has been. I mean, it was this weekend. It was high holiday traffic, but I talked to my colleague in South Carolina, and as you know, they ordered a large evacuation, and I don't think there was a whole lot of traffic on the road as much as they had expected. So we think we're okay in that regard.
Any other questions? Okay, we'll let you know about tomorrow. Thanks very much.